He remembered the sound of boots on the wooden barrack floor before he remembered why he was afraid. Long before daybreak in the ghetto of Theresienstadt, guards pushed open the door and shouted at the prisoners to get up. Children sat up in their bunks, eyes wide in the darkness. Among them was a small boy from Czechoslovakia named Peter Wolfgang Low, who later took the name Gideon Lev. He was 6 years old, one of thousands of Jewish children crammed into a place the Nazis called a model ghetto, while they decided who would live a little longer and who would be sent east. Before the war, his world had been ordinary. He had been born in Karlovy Vary in 1935 to secular Jewish parents. He knew his father as a man who worked, his mother as a woman who kept the household moving. Nazi politics, border changes, and slogans were just words in the mouths of adults. That changed when Germany annexed the Sudetenland. His family fled to Prague, hoping the larger city would give them cover. Instead, it became another way station on the road to the camps. In 1941, the order came. Peter, his parents, and other relatives were rounded up, processed, and forced onto transport. He was given a number, 885, and loaded into a train bound for Theresienstadt. The ghetto, set inside an old fortress town, was overcrowded and filthy. Entire families shared tiny rooms, with lice and disease as constant companions. Peter's memories from those first months were a blur of standing in lines, being counted, and trying to stay near his mother in the crush of people. He was too young to understand why they were there or what the word Jew had suddenly come to mean. He understood only that the adults were frightened and that food never seemed to be enough. Daily life in Theresienstadt settled into a brutal routine. Prisoners woke early for roll call in the yard. They stood in summer heat and winter cold, while guards walked the rows, checking numbers against lists. Afterward, there might be thin soup, a scrap of bread, or nothing at all, depending on the day and the shipments coming into the camp. For a child, the hunger gnawed constantly. Peter learned to eat slowly, to make small pieces of bread last. He watched other children search the ground for dropped crumbs. For Peter, the center of his world remained his mother. She did everything she could to keep him alive, sharing her food rations, finding an extra scarf, steering him away from guards who looked impatient or drunk. At night, they lay close together in crowded bunks, listening to coughing and whispered conversations. Sometimes he cried without knowing exactly why. He had a child's sense that something enormous and cruel was happening around him, something that had taken away his home and his extended family. His father was present only in fragments. He had been deported with them, but was separated and later sent on to Auschwitz and then toward Buchenwald. Word came back in broken pieces. He had been seen on a transport. He had been seen in a different camp. Then nothing. Eventually, Peter and his mother learned that he had died on a forced march between camps, one of millions lost in a system designed to work people to death when they were not killed outright. The boy carried that loss without fully grasping its scale. In Theresienstadt, death was always nearby. It was another fact of life the children learned to accept. As the years passed, Peter grew from 6 to 10 there. Seasons changed, but the fences and walls remained the same. There were small flickers of childhood even there. Older prisoners organized lessons, songs, and drawings for the children. Peter joined other boys in makeshift games in the courtyards, using scraps of wood or rags as toys. Those brief moments of play did not erase the hunger or fear, but they gave the children something beyond the gray routine of roll calls and ration lines. In 1944, the Nazis intensified the deportations. More and more trains left the ghetto for killing centers in occupied Poland. Many of the children Peter had known disappeared. Later records would show that of the roughly 15,000 children who passed through Theresienstadt, only a small fraction survived. Peter was one of them, though at the time he had no way to know how narrow his escape truly was. He only knew that his mother's name had not appeared on a transport list on the day one of his friends' names did. By early 1945, the war was turning against Germany. Rumors filtered into the camp. The Red Army was advancing from the east, Allied forces from the west. Prisoners heard distant artillery and saw changes in the guards' behavior. There was less shouting, more nervous glancing at the horizon. In May, Soviet troops reached Theresienstadt. For Peter, liberation was confusing as much as it was joyful. Soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms came through the gates. The guards who had controlled everything suddenly melted away. People cheered, cried, and collapsed from exhaustion and disease. When the gates opened, Peter walked out alive, one of the very few children to emerge from Theresienstadt after 4 years inside. He and his mother had lost 26 members of their extended family to the camps and killing centers, including his father. The ghetto that had shaped his earliest school-age years remained behind them as they tried to rebuild a life from almost nothing. In the years that followed, Peter and his mother moved through the post-war world like countless other displaced survivors. They left Czechoslovakia as the map of Europe shifted again, eventually making their way to the United States and then to Canada. He grew older, learned new languages, and adapted to new schools. The memories of the camp stayed with him. Lines of people, the weight of a number instead of a name, the constant hunger. But he also discovered peacetime life, steady meals, classrooms without guards, streets without barbed wire. As a young man, he chose a new home in Israel. In 1959, he immigrated and joined a kibbutz in the Jezreel Valley, working as a dairy farmer. He took the name Gideon Lev and built a family of his own. He served in the Israeli army during the Six-Day War and the War of Attrition, experiencing yet another kind of conflict as a soldier in a state created in the shadow of the Holocaust. The boy who had once stood in a camp courtyard at roll call now stood in uniform on the borders of a different country, carrying both his past and his responsibilities in the present. Decades later, as an older man with children and grandchildren, he began to tell his story more publicly. He co-authored a memoir, spoke to students, and used interviews and talks to reach people who might never have met a survivor in person. When he described his childhood, he talked about both sides of it, the hunger, fear, and loss, and also the games and songs that helped the children feel human inside the camp. The survival of Gideon Lev as a child in Theresienstadt was not the end of his story, but the beginning of a life spent pushing back against the hatred that had nearly destroyed him. He carried the memory of the barracks, the transport lists, and the father who never came back. He also carried an insistence on living fully in the years that followed, raising a family and speaking for those who did not survive. His story showed what it meant for a child to endure that system and still grow into a man who chose to keep going. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.